The helicopter was already 30 feet off the ground when Chief Petty Officer Kestrel Adeyemi realized they were leaving without her. Rain hammered against her face as she watched the Black Hawk climb through the canopy, its rotors tearing holes in the storm. Lieutenant Commander Prescott's voice crackled through her earpiece one final time. "She is non-essential. We are not risking the bird for support staff." The transmission cut to static. Kestrel did not respond. She never did. What Prescott did not know, what none of them knew except the one man screaming into his radio to turn back, was that Kestrel had survived worse than abandonment. And the 43 militia fighters now moving through the jungle below her position had no idea that death was watching them from the ridge above. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you have witnessed similar moments when someone was underestimated and proved everyone wrong. 6 hours earlier, Forward Operating Base Sentinel had buzzed with the controlled chaos of mission preparation. Kestrel had stood in the corner of the briefing room, invisible as always. Lieutenant Commander Prescott commanded the space like he owned it, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who had never been told no. "All right, gentlemen," he had announced, eyes sweeping past Kestrel as if she were furniture. "Intel package is confirmed. Weapons cache in grid square 774. We insert at 0400, secure the compound, and extract before the locals know we were there. Simple search and destroy." His gaze finally landed on her, dismissive and brief. "Adeyemi, you are on overwatch. Find a ridge, stay out of the way, and try not to shoot any of us." A few of the operators chuckled. Petty Officer First Class Derek Holt smirked from his seat. "Another diversity hire with a rifle," he muttered just loud enough for her to hear. "But she cannot hit anything past 200 meters. Kestrel said nothing. She had learned long ago that words were wasted on men who had already made up their minds. Instead, she studied the terrain maps, calculating distances, noting elevation changes, identifying the positions that would give her clear sight lines. The ridge Prescott had casually assigned her was actually perfect. He had no idea what he had just given her. Later that night, she had gone to the armory alone. The M40 A6 waited for her in its case, and she ran her fingers along the barrel the way a musician might touch a beloved instrument. The rifle had been modified to her exact specifications. Match-grade barrel, adjusted trigger pull at exactly 2.5 pounds. Custom cheek rest carved to fit her face and her face alone. She began the ritual of preparation, breaking down each component, inspecting, cleaning, reassembling with movements so practiced they required no conscious thought. The door opened behind her. Senior Chief Petty Officer Tobias Mwangi stepped inside, his massive frame filling the doorway. Ghost, they called him. The only man on the team who had never spoken a cruel word to her, and the only one whose silence felt like respect rather than dismissal. He watched her work for a long moment before speaking. "That is a Tier 1 trigger assembly." His voice was low, careful. "And that barrel, I have only seen work like that in one place." Kestrel did not look up. "I like precision." Ghost moved closer, his eyes fixed on the small tattoo behind her ear. Crosshairs surrounding the number 47. "Your father was Billy Adeyemi," he said. It was not a question. "The ghost of Fallujah saved my life in Ophir. Pulled me out of a building that was 30 seconds from collapse." Kestrel's hands stilled on the rifle. He hated that name. Ghost nodded slowly. "I know who you are, Chief. I have read the classified files." 47 confirmed across 3 theaters. Longest shot at 2,300 meters. He paused. "Why are you here playing babysitter for an arrogant officer who does not deserve to carry your gear?" "Because the brass decided women do not belong in combat roles," Kestrel replied, her voice carrying no bitterness, only the flat acceptance of fact. "So officially, I am intelligence. Officially, I analyze data and write reports. Officially, I do not exist." Ghost was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I will watch your back out there." And when Prescott realizes what he has, it is going to be too late for him to take credit. For the first time that night, something almost like warmth flickered through Kestrel's chest. She thought of her father, of the countless hours on the range behind their house in Virginia, his calm voice guiding her breathing. Let them underestimate you, baby girl. That is their mistake to make, not yours to correct. She had been 12 years old. She had outshot him for the first time that same day. Now the helicopter was gone, swallowed by clouds and rain and the cowardice of a man who saw her as expendable. Kestrel lay prone on the ridge, her rifle settled against her shoulder like an extension of her own body. The scope revealed the jungle below in sharp detail, despite the storm. Movement. 300 meters east. A patrol of 8 men pushing through the undergrowth, weapons ready, heading directly toward her last known position. She slowed her breathing, calculated wind speed, adjusted for the rain. 43 fighters in the jungle. 8 rounds in her magazine. No extraction, no support, no one coming to save her. Her fingers settled against the trigger with the gentleness of a prayer. She had been underestimated her entire life. Tonight, she would teach them why that was a fatal mistake. The first patrol was 200 meters out now, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like beacons advertising their position. She counted 8 of them, spread in a loose formation, confident in their numbers. They had no idea she was there. They had no idea what was about to happen. Kestrel watched them approach, her crosshairs settling on the point man. One shot would give away her position. One shot would bring every fighter in the jungle converging on this ridge. One shot would begin a fight she might not survive. But staying hidden meant letting them find her trail. Meant being hunted like prey instead of hunting like the predator she was. The point man stopped, raised his fist. The patrol halted. He was examining something on the ground. A boot print. Her boot print. He looked up toward the ridge. Kestrel made her decision. The first shot split the night like a thunderclap. The point man dropped without a sound, dead before his body hit the jungle floor. Kestrel was already moving, rolling 3 meters to her left, settling into a new position before the echo faded. The patrol scattered, shouting in Tagalog, their flashlights swinging wildly as they searched for the source of the shot. They were looking too low. They always looked too low. Second shot. The man with the radio. His hand had been halfway to the transmitter when the round took him through the chest. Now the patrol could not call for immediate backup. Now they were alone with her. Kestrel counted the seconds between their muzzle flashes and her position. They were firing blind, spraying bullets into the darkness, hitting nothing but trees and rain. Panic fire. Undisciplined. These were not soldiers. These were militia fighters who had never faced a real predator. Third shot. Fourth. 2 more bodies in the mud. The remaining 4 broke. They ran, crashing through the undergrowth, abandoning their dead, fleeing from a ghost they could not see. Kestrel let them go. She needed them to run. She needed them to spread fear through the ranks below. She needed the others to know that something was hunting them in the darkness. 8 hours earlier, the helicopter had lifted off from FOB Sentinel with the entire team aboard. Kestrel had sat apart from the others, her rifle between her knees, watching the jungle pass beneath them in an endless carpet of green. No one spoke to her. No one acknowledged her presence. She was used to it. She had been invisible her entire career, a ghost in a world that refused to see her. Ghost had taken the seat across from her, his eyes meeting hers with quiet understanding. He did not speak either, but his presence said enough. You are not alone. I see you. I know what you are. Lieutenant Commander Prescott stood at the front of the cabin, reviewing the assault plan with his inner circle. Holt and the others hung on his every word, nodding along like disciples. Primary objective is the weapons cache, Prescott announced. Secondary objective is any intel we can grab. Adeyemi provides overwatch from the northern ridge. She spots, she reports, she stays out of our way. His eyes found her briefly. Think you can handle that, Chief? Yes, sir, Kestrel replied, her voice flat and professional. She did not add what she was thinking, that his assault plan had 3 glaring vulnerabilities, that the approach route he had chosen would funnel them into a natural choke point, that the compound layout suggested this was not just a cache, but a staging area for something larger. She had submitted her analysis through proper channels. It had been ignored. The insertion went smoothly. Kestrel separated from the team at the base of the northern ridge, climbing through mud and rain to reach her overwatch position. The jungle fought her every step, vines grabbing at her gear, roots trying to trip her feet. She welcomed the struggle. It sharpened her focus, burned away everything except the mission. By the time she reached the ridge, the team was approaching the compound. She settled into position, her scope finding them easily despite the darkness. Prescott led from the middle of the formation, letting others take point. She noted that without comment. Some officers led from the front. Others managed from safety. She had stopped expecting heroism from men who had never earned their confidence. Contact in 30 seconds. Prescott's voice crackled through her earpiece. Adeyemi, report. Kestrel swept the compound through her scope. The guards were positioned exactly where the intel had predicted, but something felt wrong. The patrols were too regular. The spacing too perfect. This was not organic security. This was a pattern designed to be observed and predicted. Sir, something is wrong with the guard rotations, she reported. They are too clean. This could be a setup. Negative. Prescott cut her off. Intel is solid. We proceed as planned. Just watch our backs and try not to shoot anyone friendly. The assault began 30 seconds later. Kestrel watched through her scope as the team breached the compound perimeter. Muzzle flashes, shouting, the sharp crack of control bursts. For 90 seconds, everything went according to plan. Then the jungle erupted. Fighters poured from concealed positions on 3 sides. Not the handful the intel had predicted. Dozens. Kestrel's count reached 40 before she stopped counting. The team was surrounded, pinned down in a crossfire they had walked directly into. Contact, Prescott screamed into the radio, his voice cracking. Heavy contact. We need immediate extract. Kestrel was already working. Her crosshairs found a fighter lining up a shot on Ghost's position. She fired. The fighter dropped. Another was climbing to a rooftop with an RPG. She fired. He tumbled backward, the rocket discharging harmlessly into the sky. A third was flanking Holt's position. She fired. 3 shots. 3 kills. 3 of her teammates who would never know how close they had come to death. Prescott's voice came through the radio, dismissive even in crisis. Lucky shots, Adeyemi. Stay in your lane. Kestrel did not respond. She kept shooting, kept saving lives that would never acknowledge her existence. The team fought their way to the extraction point, leaving bodies in their wake, and she covered every step of their retreat. By the time the helicopter appeared over the canopy, she had fired 11 rounds. 11 fighters who would never threaten her teammates again. Then came the moment that changed everything. The Black Hawk descended toward the extraction point, its downdraft flattening the grass. The team piled aboard, wounded helping wounded, everyone accounted for except the woman on the ridge who had kept them alive. Kestrel was already moving toward the secondary extraction point when Prescott's transmission stopped her cold. Negative on ridge pickup. We are at capacity and taking fire. She is non-essential support. Adeyemi can make her own way to alternate extract. Ghost's voice exploded through the radio. You cannot leave her out here. Commander, she just saved half this team. Turn the bird around. That is an order, Senior Chief. We are not risking the aircraft for intelligence support. The helicopter rose. Kestrel watched it climb through her scope, watched Ghost's face in the open door, watched him reaching toward her position as if he could somehow pull her aboard through sheer force of will. Then the clouds swallowed them, and she was alone. Now, 4 survivors from that first patrol were spreading terror through the enemy ranks. Kestrel could hear the distant shouting, the confused orders, the fear rippling through the jungle like a shock wave. They knew someone was out here now. They knew she had teeth. She checked her ammunition. 17 rounds remaining. 40-plus fighters between her and any hope of extraction. 18 hours until dawn. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. When you are outnumbered, baby girl, you do not fight fair. You fight smart. You make them afraid of the dark. Kestrel smiled grimly and began to move. Kestrel moved through the jungle like water flowing downhill, finding the path of least resistance, leaving no trace of her passage. The rain was her ally now, washing away footprints, masking sound, turning the world into a gray curtain that swallowed everything more than 20 meters away. She had trained for this. She had lived this. 3 deployments in terrain that wanted to kill her had taught her how to become part of the landscape itself. Behind her, the enemy was reorganizing. She could hear them shouting coordinates, establishing search patterns, trying to impose order on their fear. They were doing everything by the book, spreading out in teams of 4, maintaining visual contact, sweeping the grid systematically. It was textbook counter-sniper protocol, and it told her something important. Someone down there had real training. Someone was directing this hunt with professional discipline. She filed that information away and kept moving. The jungle floor was treacherous in the darkness, roots and vines conspiring to trip her with every step. Kestrel navigated by instinct, her feet finding solid ground while her eyes stayed fixed on the shadows ahead. Every few minutes she would pause, sink into the undergrowth, and listen. The enemy was loud. Flashlights cutting through the rain. Boots splashing through mud. Voices calling out positions. They were hunters who had never learned that silence was the first weapon. 30 minutes after leaving the ridge, she found what she was looking for. A natural depression in the terrain, shielded by fallen trees and thick brush. It would not hide her forever, but it would give her time to think. Time to plan. Time to turn this hunt around. She settled into the depression and took inventory. 17 rounds for the M40. Her sidearm with 2 full magazines. A combat knife. 2 fragmentation grenades. Water for maybe 6 hours. No food, but hunger was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight was about survival. The radio on her vest crackled with static. She had kept it on the team frequency, hoping for something, anything. Ghost's voice broke through the noise, distant and distorted, but unmistakably his. Adeyemi, if you can hear this, we are coming back for you. Master Chief is raising hell. Prescott is facing questions he cannot answer. Just stay alive. We are coming. The transmission cut out before she could respond. She was not even sure her radio had the range to reach them. But Ghost's words settled into her chest like a small flame, warming something that had gone cold the moment that helicopter lifted off without her. They were coming. She just had to survive long enough for them to arrive. A branch snapped somewhere to her east. Kestrel froze, her hand moving slowly to her rifle. Through the rain, she could see flashlight beams cutting through the trees, maybe 60 meters out. A patrol of 6, moving in a loose wedge formation, heading directly toward her position. They had not seen her yet. They were searching blind, hoping to stumble onto her trail. She had a choice. Let them pass and risk them finding her tracks, or thin their numbers and relocate before reinforcements arrived. The lead man stopped. He was examining the ground, his flashlight illuminating the mud at his feet. He said something to the others, pointing toward the depression where Kestrel lay hidden. He had found something, a partial print, a broken branch, something that told him prey was close. Kestrel made her decision. The first shot took the tracker through the head. He dropped instantly, his flashlight spinning away into the darkness. The others reacted faster than the previous patrol, diving for cover, returning fire toward her muzzle flash. But she was already gone, rolling through the brush, finding a new position 15 meters to the north. Their bullets tore through the space she had occupied seconds before. She let them waste their ammunition on empty jungle. When the firing stopped, when they began to creep forward to confirm their kill, she was waiting. Second shot, the man on the left flank. Third shot, the one trying to use his radio. Fourth shot, another tracker who had been reading the ground too well. 3 remained. They were not running. These were not the same panicked militia from before. These 3 dropped into defensive positions, covering each other, waiting for her to make a mistake. Professional responses. Trained responses. Kestrel studied them through her scope. Their gear was different from the others. Better weapons. Better discipline. These were not local fighters. These were something else entirely. One of them spoke into a radio, his words too distant to hear, but his tone unmistakable. He was reporting contact. He was calling for backup, and he was doing it in Russian. The realization hit her like ice water. This was not just a militia weapons cache. There were foreign advisors embedded with these fighters. Professional soldiers. Men who understood exactly what they were dealing with. She needed to move. Now, Kestrel slipped backward through the brush, putting distance between herself and the three survivors. They would hold position until reinforcements arrived. That gave her maybe 10 minutes to disappear. The jungle seemed darker now, more oppressive. The rain had intensified, hammering against the canopy above, turning the world into a wall of sound and water. She pushed through it, ignoring the branches that clawed at her face, the mud that sucked at her boots, the exhaustion that was beginning to gnaw at the edges of her focus. 800 meters south, she found a stream swollen with rainwater. She waded in, letting the current carry away any scent, any trace, any hope of tracking her through conventional means. The water was cold enough to make her gasp, but she forced herself to keep moving, following the stream until it bent westward toward lower ground. When she finally emerged, she was shivering but invisible. No trail, no tracks, no way for them to follow. She climbed a small rise and looked back the way she had come. Flashlights were converging on her last position, dozens of them now, a swarm of fireflies hunting for a ghost that had already vanished. Among them, she could see figures moving with different purpose, different discipline. The Russians, coordinating the search, turning chaos into order. Her count had been wrong. This was not 40 fighters anymore. Reinforcements were pouring in from somewhere, responding to the contact reports, eager to find the sniper who had bloodied their patrols. She estimated 60 now, maybe more. 17 rounds, 60 enemies, one woman alone in the jungle. Her father's voice came to her again, calm and steady, the way he always sounded when everything was falling apart. Odds do not matter, baby girl. What matters is making them pay for every inch, making them afraid to take the next step. Kestrel checked her rifle, confirmed the round in the chamber, and began planning her next ambush. Somewhere in that swarm of lights, someone was giving orders. Someone was turning this rabble into an effective hunting force. Find that someone, eliminate him, and the rest would fall apart. She had a new objective now. Find the commander. Kill the brain, and the body would die. The hunt had just become mutual. Colonel Yuri Volkov stood over the bodies of his men and felt something he had not experienced in years. Respect. Whoever had done this was not some frightened support soldier hiding in the jungle. The shot placements were precise. Center mass on the runners. Headshots on the threats. Every kill had been calculated, purposeful, efficient. This was the work of a professional. He crouched beside the first body, examining the entry wound with clinical detachment. The angle told him the shooter had been elevated, probably on the ridge to the north. The grouping told him the shooter had relocated between shots, never firing twice from the same position. The selection of targets told him the shooter understood tactics, had prioritized the radio operator and the tracker before engaging the others. One of his militia liaisons approached, nervous and sweating despite the rain. "Colonel, we have lost 11 men. The fighters are becoming afraid. They say there is a demon in the jungle." Volkov stood slowly, his pale eyes scanning the tree-line. Not a demon, a sniper, and a very good one. He paused, processing the implications. The American team extracted hours ago. They left someone behind. The liaison looked confused. Why would they leave one of their own? Because they are fools, Volkov replied. Because they did not understand what they had. He turned to face the man directly. Pull the patrols back to the river line. Establish a cordon. No one moves through the jungle in groups smaller than 10. And bring me Sergeant Kozlov. I need someone who can track. The liaison hurried away, grateful to escape. Volkov remained, studying the jungle, thinking. In his 30 years of military service, he had hunted snipers and been hunted by them. He had learned to read their patterns, to understand their psychology, to predict their movements. This one was different. This one was not just running. This one was fighting back. He allowed himself a thin smile. Finally, something interesting. 3 kilometers to the west, Kestrel was discovering just how badly the odds had shifted against her. From her concealed position on a rocky outcrop, she could see the enemy reorganizing below. The chaotic search patterns had been replaced by something far more dangerous. Disciplined cordons, overlapping fields of observation, systematic grid sweeps that left no gaps to exploit. Someone down there knew what they were doing. She counted the flashlights, estimated the spacing, calculated the coverage. They were establishing a perimeter around the entire operational area, boxing her in. If she did not break through in the next few hours, the noose would tighten until there was nowhere left to run. Her ammunition situation was becoming critical. 11 rounds remaining for the M40. She had expended 6 in the last engagement, and while every shot had counted, the math was unforgiving. 11 rounds. 60%. Even if she never missed, she could not shoot her way out of this. She needed to be smarter. She needed to find a commander and end this with a single well-placed shot. The rain was finally beginning to ease, the storm moving east toward the coast. That was bad. Rain had been her ally, masking her movement, limiting visibility. Without it, the jungle would become far more dangerous. She had maybe 2 hours before dawn, 2 hours of darkness left to work with. Kestrel began moving again, paralleling the enemy cordon, looking for weakness. Every defensive line had gaps. Every perimeter had blind spots. She just had to find them before they found her. An hour later, she discovered something unexpected. A game trail cutting through dense brush, leading toward a cluster of structures she had not seen on any map. She approached carefully, using every scrap of cover, until the buildings came into view. It was a forward camp, tents and temporary shelters arranged around a central clearing. Generator lights casting harsh shadows. Men moving with purpose, unloading supplies, establishing communications equipment. This was not part of the original target compound. This was something else entirely. A command post, hidden in the jungle, directing the entire operation. And standing in the center of it all, illuminated by generator lights, was a man who moved with unmistakable authority. Tall, lean, gray hair cropped close to his skull. He wore no insignia, but everything about him screamed military. The way he stood, the way others deferred to him, the way his eyes constantly swept the perimeter, searching for threats. The Russian commander. It had to be. Kestrel settled into position, her scope finding him easily. Range, 600 meters. Wind, minimal. Humidity, high but manageable. An easy shot under normal circumstances. She could end this right now, put a round through his chest, and watch the entire operation fall apart. Her finger moved to the trigger. Then she saw something that made her blood freeze. 2 men were dragging a figure from one of the tents. American flight suit, bloodied face, hands bound behind his back. A pilot, one of their pilots, shot down and captured, being hauled toward the commander like a trophy. The Russian examined the prisoner with casual interest, speaking words Kestrel could not hear. Then he gestured, and one of the guards struck the pilot across the face, driving him to his knees. Kestrel's crosshairs drifted from the commander to the guards, then back again. One shot would kill the commander, but it would also condemn the pilot. The moment she fired, they would execute him and disappear into the jungle before she could chamber another round. She had a choice: complete the mission and sacrifice an innocent man, or abandon the shot and find another way. Her father's voice came to her, but this time it offered no easy answers. Some choices do not have right answers, baby girl. Some choices just have consequences you have to live with. The commander turned away, disappearing into a tent. The pilot was dragged in the opposite direction, toward a structure that looked disturbingly like a holding cell. The opportunity was gone. Kestrel lowered her rifle and forced herself to breathe. The mission had just become infinitely more complicated. She was no longer just trying to survive. She was no longer just trying to kill a commander. Now, there was a prisoner to rescue, a man who would be tortured and killed if she did not find a way to reach him. Prescott had left her behind because she was non-essential, because her life did not matter enough to risk the helicopter. She could still hear his dismissive voice, still feel the cold weight of his judgment. She would not do the same to this pilot. She would not leave anyone behind. The first light of dawn was beginning to touch the eastern sky. Kestrel memorized the layout of the camp, counted the guards, identified the patrol patterns. Then she melted back into the jungle to plan. She had 12 hours until nightfall. 12 hours to figure out how to breach a fortified camp, eliminate a professional military commander, rescue a prisoner, and escape through 60 hostile fighters. The odds were impossible, but impossible was just another word for difficult, and Kestrel Adeyemi had never let difficult stop her before. The bullet came from nowhere. Kestrel felt the impact before she heard the shot, a searing line of fire across her left side that spun her into the undergrowth. She hit the ground rolling, instinct taking over, putting a thick tree trunk between herself and the shooter's position. Blood was already soaking through her shirt, hot and wet against her skin. She had been careless. Exhaustion and the distraction of the prisoner had made her sloppy, and now she was paying for it. Somewhere out there, an enemy marksman had spotted her movement and taken a shot. Only the fact that she had been turning at the exact moment of impact had saved her life. An inch to the right, and the round would have punched through her lung. Kestrel pressed her hand against the wound, assessing the damage by feel. The bullet had grazed her, carving a furrow through the flesh over her ribs, but missing anything vital. Painful, bloody, survivable. She pulled her emergency bandage from her kit and wrapped it tight, biting down on the agony that flared with every movement. The jungle had gone silent. No birds, no insects. Even the rain had stopped, leaving behind a humid stillness that felt like held breath. The shooter was out there, waiting for her to move, waiting for another chance. She could feel his eyes on her, patient and professional. This was not a militia fighter. This was someone like her. She forced herself to think through the pain. The shot had come from the southeast, maybe 400 meters out. Elevated position, probably the rocky ridge she had skirted an hour earlier. The shooter had discipline, had waited for a clean shot instead of spraying and praying like the others. That meant training. That meant the Russians had brought more than just advisors. They had brought a counter-sniper. Kestrel remained motionless behind the tree, controlling her breathing, listening for any sound that might betray her hunter's position. Minutes passed. The blood continued to seep through her bandage, slower now, but still draining her strength. She could not stay here. The wound needed proper treatment, and every moment she remained stationary was another moment for the enemy to reposition. She studied the terrain around her, mapping escape routes, identifying cover. 30 meters to her north, a shallow ravine cut through the jungle floor. If she could reach it, she could use the dead ground to break contact, disappear before the sniper could reacquire her. 30 meters. An eternity when someone was waiting to kill you. Kestrel pulled a small mirror from her kit, using it to scan the jungle without exposing herself. Nothing. No movement. No reflection off a scope. The shooter was good, completely invisible in the foliage. She would have to move blind and hope her speed was enough. She took 3 deep breaths, flooding her muscles with oxygen, preparing for the sprint. Then she exploded from cover. The shot cracked past her head, close enough to feel the pressure wave, but she was already diving into the ravine, tumbling down the slope in a controlled fall that ended with her pressed flat against the muddy bottom. Another shot gouged the earth where she had been a half-second before. Then silence. Kestrel crawled through the ravine, staying below the lip, putting distance between herself and the kill zone. Her side screamed with every movement, the wound tearing wider with the exertion. She ignored it. Pain was just information. Pain could be processed later. Right now, survival was the only thing that mattered. The ravine twisted westward, carrying her away from the sniper's position. After 200 meters, she risked climbing out, finding concealment in a dense thicket of bamboo. She lay there, gasping, her vision swimming at the edges. Blood loss was becoming a serious concern. She needed to stop, needed to treat the wound properly, but the sniper was still out there, still hunting. She pulled out her medical kit with shaking hands. The bandage was soaked through, useless. She cut it away and examined the wound in the dim light filtering through the canopy. The furrow was deeper than she had hoped, exposing muscle, still bleeding freely. This needed stitches. This needed a hospital. What got was field medicine and willpower. Kestrel poured antiseptic into the wound, clamping her jaw shut against the urge to scream. Then she packed it with gauze, wrapped it tight with a fresh bandage, and secured the whole mess with medical tape. It would hold. It had to hold. While she worked, her mind kept circling back to the pilot in that camp. Lieutenant something, probably. Some kid who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, shot down over hostile territory, now facing interrogation and worse. She did not know his name, did not know anything about him, but she knew what it felt like to be abandoned, to be written off as acceptable losses. She would not let that happen to him. The sound of movement reached her ears, distant but approaching. The cordon was tightening, search teams pushing through the jungle, driving her toward the sniper's position. They were working together, the hunters and the shooter, trying to flush her into his sights. Kestrel checked her rifle. 11 rounds. The number had not changed, but it felt smaller now, insufficient against the forces arrayed against her. She was wounded, exhausted, outnumbered, and outmaneuvered. Every tactical instinct she possessed was screaming at her to run, to find a hole and hide until rescue arrived. But rescue might not come. Ghost had promised they were coming, but promises meant nothing against the reality of military bureaucracy. Prescott would be fighting any rescue mission, protecting his decision, burying his mistake. The pilot did not have time to wait for the Navy to sort out its politics. She thought of her father again, not his words this time, but his face. The way he looked at her when she landed her first 1,000-meter shot at 15 years old. Pride in something else. Recognition. He had seen himself in her that day, seen the same stubborn refusal to accept impossible odds. "You are my daughter," he had said, "and my daughter does not quit." Kestrel forced herself to her feet, swaying slightly as her body protested the movement. The pain was a living thing now, coiled around her ribs, but she pushed it down, locked it away in the same place. She kept all the things that might slow her down. The search teams were getting closer. She could hear their voices, see flickers of movement through the trees. The sniper was still out there somewhere, waiting for another shot. And somewhere in that camp, a pilot was counting the hours until his captors decided he had no more value. She had 11 rounds, a bleeding wound, and roughly 12 hours until nightfall. It would have to be enough. Kestrel began moving again, not away from the enemy this time, but toward them, toward the camp, toward the pilot, toward the impossible rescue that every rational part of her mind said could not succeed. Rational had never been her strength anyway. 8,000 miles away, Master Chief Miguel Castellanos slammed his fist on the conference table hard enough to rattle the coffee cups. "I do not care what your assessment was, Lieutenant Commander. You left a sailor behind in hostile territory. That is not a judgment call. That is a violation of everything we stand for." Prescott stood rigid at the far end of the room, his jaw tight, his eyes betraying the first cracks in his confidence. "Master Chief, with respect, she was non-essential personnel. Intelligence support. The extraction was under fire, and I made a tactical decision to prioritize combat operators." Ghost stepped forward from the wall where he had been standing in barely contained fury. Non-essential. He let the words hang in the air like an accusation. "Tell me, Commander, how many of your essential personnel would be dead right now without her covering fire?" "I counted at least 4 shots that saved lives during that extraction. 4 of your operators are breathing because of the woman you abandoned." "She is support staff," Prescott insisted, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Her job was to observe and report. Her job." Ghost reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document, tossing it onto the table. "I pulled her service record. The real one, not the sanitized version they give to officers who do not have clearance." He looked at Castellanos. "Master Chief, requesting permission to read the relevant sections aloud." Castellanos nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Prescott's face. "Granted." Ghost unfolded the paper, though he barely glanced at it. He had memorized the contents hours ago. Chief Petty Officer Kestrel Adeyemi, graduate of the Joint Special Operations Sniper Program, class of 2016. First woman to complete the full course. 47 confirmed kills across 3 operational theaters. He paused, letting the number sink in. 47. Longest confirmed shot at 2,340 meters. Holder of the classified program record for accuracy under combat conditions. The room had gone silent. Even Prescott seemed frozen, his face draining of color as the reality of his mistake became clear. Ghost continued, his voice cold and precise. She was attached to your team as intelligence support because the brass decided women should not officially serve in combat roles. So they buried her in a classification so deep that arrogant officers like you would never know what they had. He stepped closer to Prescott, close enough that the height difference between them became a physical threat. You did not leave behind support staff, Commander. You left behind one of the deadliest snipers in the United States military. And right now, she is alone in that jungle with your enemy. And she is either going to die out there or she's going to do what she has always done. Survive. Castellanos spoke into the silence that followed. I am authorizing an immediate extraction mission. Senior Chief Mwangi, you will lead a foreman team back to the operational area. Find Chief Adeyemi and bring her home. Ghost nodded sharply. Already have my team selected, Master Chief. Prescott found his voice. Master Chief, I must protest. Sending more personnel into that area based on the service record of one sailor is reckless. She has likely already been captured or killed. We would be risking lives for a recovery mission, not a rescue. Castellanos turned to face him fully, and something in his expression made Prescott take an involuntary step backward. Lieutenant Commander, you are relieved of operational authority pending formal review. You will confine yourself to quarters until further notice. He paused. And if Chief Adeyemi does not come home, I will personally ensure that your career ends in a courtroom. Dismissed. Prescott left without another word. The door closed behind him with a sound like a coffin lid. Ghost was already moving toward the exit when Castellanos called after him. Senior Chief, bring her back. Whatever it takes. I intend to, Master Chief. Ghost paused at the door. She saved my life once. Time to return the favor. In a Philippine jungle, Kestrel had no way of knowing that help was finally coming. She only knew that the sun was beginning to set, painting the canopy in shades of orange and red, and that she had spent the last 10 hours working her way closer to the enemy camp while avoiding patrols that seemed to be everywhere. Her wound had stabilized, the bleeding reduced to a slow seep that stained her bandage, but no longer threatened her consciousness. The pain had become background noise, a constant companion that she acknowledged and ignored in equal measure. She had eaten nothing, drunk only rainwater collected in broad leaves, and slept in 20-minute intervals when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. Now she lay in the brush 300 meters from the camp perimeter, watching the guards change shifts, memorizing their patterns, counting their weapons. The camp had grown since morning. More tents, more fighters, more equipment. Whatever operation the Russians were running here, it was expanding rapidly. And at the center of it all, Colonel Volkov moved like a spider at the heart of his web. She had watched him throughout the day, studying his habits, learning his patterns. He was careful, never exposing himself unnecessarily, always surrounded by guards. But he had one weakness that she had identified: arrogance. He believed his cordon was impenetrable, believed his counter-sniper had her pinned down somewhere in the jungle, believed that one wounded woman could not possibly threaten his operation. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The pilot was still alive. She had caught glimpses of him being moved between structures, had heard his voice once when a guard struck him and he cried out in pain. They were interrogating him, extracting whatever intelligence he possessed, but they had not killed him yet. That meant she still had time. Kestrel checked her rifle one final time. 11 rounds. She had not fired a shot since the counter-sniper engagement, conserving every bullet for the moment when they would matter most. Tonight, they would matter. The last light faded from the sky, and darkness reclaimed the jungle. Somewhere in the camp, a generator coughed to life, casting pools of harsh light that created as many shadows as they dispelled. Guards took their positions. Patrols began their circuits. The night shift settled into the false security of routine. Kestrel rose from her concealment and began to move. She was no longer running, no longer hiding, no longer waiting to be rescued. She was hunting. And Colonel Yuri Volkov had no idea that death was walking toward him through the darkness, wrapped in mud and blood and absolute determination. The first guard died without knowing she was there. Kestrel materialized from the shadows behind him, her knife sliding across his throat in a single fluid motion, her other hand clamping over his mouth to catch the gurgle that tried to escape. She lowered his body gently to the ground, easing him into the brush where he would not be discovered until morning. No rifle. Not yet. Gunfire would bring the entire camp down on her position. For now, this had to be silent work, close work, the kind of killing that left no room for distance or detachment. She had trained for this too, though she preferred the clean mathematics of a long-range shot. Tonight, mathematics would not be enough. She moved through the perimeter like smoke, exploiting the gaps between patrol routes, the blind spots created by the generator lights, the complacency of guards who believed the real threat was somewhere out in the jungle. 2 more sentries felt her knife before she reached the inner ring of the camp. The holding structure was exactly where she had mapped it during her daylight observation. A squat wooden building with a single door, a single window, and 2 guards stationed outside. Through the window, she could see the faint glow of a lantern, could hear the low murmur of voices. The pilot was inside. She was certain of it. Kestrel studied the guards from the shadows, calculating angles, measuring distances. They were alert, professional, positioned to cover each other. Taking them silently would be nearly impossible. One would raise an alarm before she could reach the second. She needed a distraction. Her hand found one of the fragmentation grenades on her vest. She had been saving them for emergencies, and this qualified. But an explosion would bring every fighter in the camp running. She would have seconds at most to breach the building, free the pilot, and disappear before they were overwhelmed. Seconds would have to be enough. Kestrel circled to the far side of the camp, moving with excruciating patience, until she reached the motor pool. 3 trucks and a fuel depot, poorly guarded, positioned perfectly. She wedged the grenade beneath the largest fuel drum, tied a length of cord to the pin, and ran the cord through the brush to a position with clear sight lines to the holding building. Then she waited. The minutes stretched like hours. Her wound throbbed with every heartbeat, a persistent reminder of her mortality. She thought about her father, about the last time she had seen him before his final deployment. He had hugged her at the airport, his arms strong and certain around her, and whispered something she had never forgotten. "Come home, baby girl. Whatever happens out there, you find a way to come home." She had been 17. He had shipped out to Afghanistan 3 days later. 6 weeks after that, a chaplain had knocked on their front door, and her mother's screams had shattered the morning silence. Kestrel had enlisted the day she turned 18. Not for revenge, not for glory, for him, to honor the legacy he had left behind, to become the warrior he had always believed she could be. And now here she was, alone in enemy territory, about to do something monumentally stupid for a man she had never met. Her father would have understood. He had been the same kind of fool, the kind who could not leave anyone behind no matter the cost. A patrol passed within 10 meters of her position, close enough that she could smell the cigarette smoke on their clothes. She held her breath, held perfectly still, and let them walk by without ever knowing death had been watching from the shadows. When they were gone, she checked her watch. 2 hours until the rescue team could possibly arrive, assuming Ghost had convinced the brass to authorize a mission. 2 hours was an eternity. The pilot might not have 2 hours. She could not wait any longer. Kestrel pulled the cord. The explosion split the night like the wrath of God. The fuel depot erupted in a pillar of flame that painted the jungle orange, throwing shadows that danced like demons across the camp. Secondary explosions followed as the trucks caught fire, their gas tanks rupturing, adding to the chaos. Men poured from tents, shouting, running toward the blaze, drawn to the destruction like moths to a flame. The guards at the holding building hesitated, torn between their posts and the inferno consuming the motor pool. Kestrel did not hesitate. She broke from cover at a dead sprint, her rifle up, her crosshairs finding the first guard before he even registered the movement. The shot took him through the chest, spinning him against the wall. The second guard turned, his weapon rising, but she was faster. Second shot. Center mass. He dropped. She hit the door at full speed, shoulder first, crashing through into the dim interior. A single guard inside, scrambling for his rifle. Third shot. He fell across the table he had been sitting at, scattering cards and cigarettes. The pilot was in the corner, bound to a chair, his face a mask of blood and bruises. His eyes went wide when he saw her, wide with disbelief and something that might have been hope. Kestrel crossed to him in 3 strides, her knife already out. She cut his bonds with quick, efficient strokes, hauled him to his feet, shoved her sidearm into his hands. "Can you move?" she demanded. It was not really a question. The pilot swayed, but steadied himself, his fingers wrapping around the pistol with the familiarity of training. "I can move." "Then move." She grabbed his arm, pulled him toward the door. "We have about 30 seconds before they figure out where the shots came from." They burst from the building into chaos. The fuel depot was still burning, casting wild light across the camp, creating a hellscape of running figures and shouted orders. Kestrel turned toward the jungle, toward the darkness that had been her ally all night, pulling the pilot behind her. 20 meters to the tree line, then 10, then 5. A voice cut through the chaos, calm and commanding, speaking Russian. Kestrel did not understand the words, but she understood the tone. Someone had just taken control of the situation. She glanced back and saw him. Colonel Volkov, standing in the middle of the camp, pointing directly at her, his pale eyes locked onto her position with predatory focus. He had seen her. The race was on. Kestrel shoved the pilot into the jungle and plunged in after him, bullets snapping through the branches around them, the hunt resuming with renewed fury. Behind them, Volkov began to follow. They ran through darkness that seemed alive with pursuit. Kestrel led the way, her instincts guiding her through terrain she had memorized during hours of careful observation. The pilot stumbled behind her, his breathing ragged, his body weakened by days of captivity and abuse, but he kept moving. He understood what she understood. Stopping meant dying. Behind them, the jungle erupted with activity. Flashlight beams sliced through the canopy. Voices shouted coordinates in Tagalog and Russian. The organized hunt had become a frenzied chase, dozens of fighters crashing through the undergrowth, desperate to catch the woman who had humiliated them. Kestrel counted her remaining ammunition as she ran. 8 rounds in the rifle, 2 magazines for the sidearm she had given the pilot, 1 fragmentation grenade. The mathematics of survival were not in her favor, but mathematics had stopped matching hours ago. "What is your name?" she asked without slowing, her voice barely above a whisper. The pilot took a moment to answer, conserving his breath for running. "Lieutenant Commander James Okafor, helicopter pilot. Shot down 4 days ago." "Kestrel." She ducked under a low branch, pulling him down with her. "Keep moving. We have maybe 3 kilometers to the extraction point." "Extraction point." Okafor's voice carried a note of desperate hope. "There is a team coming?" "There had better be." She did not mention that the extraction point was a guess, a location she had identified as tactically viable during her earlier reconnaissance. She did not mention that she had no way of knowing if Ghost had convinced anyone to authorize a rescue mission. Some lies were necessary. They pushed deeper into the jungle, the sounds of pursuit fading slightly as the terrain grew more difficult. Kestrel navigated by memory and moonlight, finding the game trail she had mapped, the natural corridors that would carry them towards safety. Her wound had reopened during the sprint from the camp, fresh blood soaking through the bandage, but she ignored it. Pain was a luxury she could not afford. Okafor was struggling. She could hear it in his breathing, see in the way he moved. The man had been beaten, starved, probably deprived of sleep. Every step was costing him more than he had to give. But he kept moving, kept fighting, driven by the same stubborn refusal to quit that she recognized in herself. She slowed the pace slightly, enough to let him catch his breath without stopping completely. They had gained some distance. They could afford a few seconds of relative rest. "Thank you," Okafor managed between gasps. "For coming back. You did not have to." "Yes, I did." Kestrel scanned the jungle behind them, watching for movement. "Someone left me behind tonight, too. I know what that feels like." Okafor was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the Russian, "The colonel. He talked about you while they were interrogating me. So they had a ghost in the jungle killing his men." He was impressed and furious. "Good." She started moving again, pulling him along. Fury makes people stupid. They covered another kilometer before disaster struck. Okafor's foot caught a root in the darkness, sending him sprawling. Kestrel heard the sharp crack of impact, heard his strangled cry of pain, and knew before she reached him what had happened. His ankle was broken. The bone had not pierced the skin, but the joint was already swelling, twisted at an angle that made movement impossible. Okafor looked up at her, his face pale in the moonlight, and she saw the realization in his eyes. "Go," he said. "Leave me. You cannot carry me 3 kilometers through this terrain." Kestrel crouched beside him, assessing the injury with quick, professional detachment. He was right. Carrying him would slow her to a crawl, would make them both easy targets for the hunters closing in behind them. The tactical choice was obvious. Leave him, reach extraction, send help back if there was time. She thought about Prescott, about the helicopter lifting off without her, about the cold calculation in his voice when he had written her off as acceptable losses. "Can you shoot?" she asked. Okafor blinked, confused by the question. "I am a pilot." "But yes." She pressed her rifle into his hands, keeping only the sidearm for herself. "If they find us, you cover our backs. I will get us out." "Kestrel, this is insane. You cannot carry me and fight off pursuit at the same time. Watch me." She hauled him up, draped his arm over her shoulders, took his weight against her wounded side. The pain was immediate and staggering, a white-hot lance that drove through her ribs with every step. She pushed through it, forced her legs to move, began the agonizing process of dragging them both towards safety. They managed 500 meters before the pursuit caught up. Flashlights appeared through the trees behind them, moving fast, coordinated. Kestrel lowered Okafor behind a fallen log, positioned him with sight lines toward the approaching enemy, and drew her pistol. "Conserve ammunition," she told him. "Only shoot what you can hit." The first fighters emerged from the darkness, 3 of them, spread in a loose formation. Okafor's rifle cracked once, twice. 2 men fell. The third dove for cover, shouting for reinforcements. More lights were converging now, drawn by the gunfire. Kestrel could see at least a dozen beams cutting through the jungle, encircling their position. The mathematics had finally caught up with them. Too many enemies. Not enough bullets. No way out. She had failed. Then she heard it, distant but unmistakable. The rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors cutting through the night sky. Ghost's voice crackled through her radio, the first transmission she had received in hours. "Adeyemi, if you can hear me, pop smoke. We're coming in hot." Kestrel pulled the smoke grenade from her vest, yanked the pin, and hurled it into the clearing ahead. Green smoke billowed into the air, marking their position for the incoming aircraft. The jungle exploded with light as the rescue helicopter roared overhead, its door gunners opening up on the enemy positions with devastating accuracy. Fighters scattered, their pursuit shattered by the sudden violence from above. Ghost's voice again, calm despite the chaos. "Hold position. 30 seconds to touchdown." Kestrel looked at Okafor, saw the disbelief on his face, and allowed herself a single moment of relief. They were going home. The helicopter touched down in a hurricane of rotor wash and chaos. Ghost was the first out, his weapon up, laying down suppressive fire as he sprinted toward their position. 2 more operators followed, forming a protective corridor between the aircraft and the fallen log where Kestrel and Okafor had made their stand. Kestrel grabbed Okafor, hauled him upright, and began dragging him toward the helicopter. Every step sent fresh agony through her wounded side, but she could see the open door, could see the crew chief reaching toward them, could see salvation 30 meters away. 20 meters. 10. Ghost reached them, took Okafor's other arm, and together they covered the final distance. The crew chief grabbed the pilot and hauled him aboard. Ghost pushed Kestrel toward the door. "Go," he shouted over the rotor noise. "I am right behind you." Kestrel turned to climb aboard. The shot came from the treeline. Ghost staggered, a red bloom spreading across his shoulder, his weapon falling from suddenly nerveless fingers. He went down hard, and Kestrel saw movement in the shadows beyond, saw a figure emerge from the jungle with a rifle raised for a follow-up shot. Volkov. The Russian colonel moved with the fluid precision of a predator, his scope already finding Ghost's prone form, his finger tightening on the trigger. He had come alone, had tracked them through the jungle while his men provided distraction, had waited for the perfect moment to strike. Kestrel did not think. She moved. Her pistol came up, but she knew even as she raised it that she was too slow. The distance was wrong, the angle was wrong, everything was wrong. Volkov was going to kill Ghost, and then he was going to kill her, and then this entire rescue would have been for nothing. Then Okafor fired. The rifle shot from the helicopter door caught Volkov in the chest, staggering him backward, throwing off his aim. His shot went wide, punching into the dirt beside Ghost's head. The colonel stumbled, looked down at the wound in his chest with something like surprise, and then looked up at Kestrel with eyes that held nothing but cold recognition. He raised his rifle again. Kestrel closed the distance in 3 strides, her pistol barking twice, both rounds finding their mark. Volkov's weapon fell from his hands. He dropped to his knees in the mud, blood spreading across his chest, his breathing becoming wet and labored. She stood over him, her pistol aimed at his head, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. Hunter and hunter, predator and predator. 2 professionals at the end of a very long hunt. "How many of my men?" Volkov asked, his voice barely a whisper. Kestrel did not answer immediately. She thought about the patrol she had ambushed, the guard she had killed, the trail of bodies she had left through the jungle. She had not been counting. Counting implied that the number mattered, and it did not. Every shot had been survival. Every kill had been necessary. "Enough," she finally said. Volkov nodded slowly, as if this answer satisfied him. "Your father was good." His words came in short gasps now, his lungs filling with blood. "I read the files when we identified your rifle modifications." Billy Adeyemi. The ghost of Fallujah. Kestrel's finger tightened on the trigger, but she did not fire. "Not yet. You are better." Volkov coughed, a wet sound that sprayed crimson across his lips. "You are the best I have ever hunted. It has been an honor." His hand moved toward his sidearm. Kestrel fired once. Volkov slumped backward, his pale eyes going empty, his hunt finally over. She stood over his body for a moment, feeling nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just exhaustion and the bone-deep weariness of someone who had pushed far beyond their limits. Ghost's voice brought her back. "Kestrel, we need to move." She turned and found him struggling to rise, his shoulder wound bleeding freely but not fatally. She holstered her pistol, grabbed his uninjured arm, and pulled him to his feet. "You got shot," she observed. Ghost managed a pained smile. "So did you. Difference is, I only got shot once." They limped toward the helicopter together, leaning on each other, 2 warriors who had survived the impossible. The crew chief reached down to help them aboard, and the aircraft was lifting off before they were fully seated. Kestrel collapsed against the bulkhead, her body finally surrendering to the punishment it had endured. The medic was already cutting away her blood-soaked bandage, his expression grim as he examined the wound beneath. "How bad?" she asked. "You need surgery," the medic replied, "but you will live." He shook his head, something like awe in his voice. "How are you even conscious right now?" She did not have an answer for that. She was not entirely sure she was conscious. The world had taken on a dreamlike quality, sounds muffled, vision swimming, everything distant and strange. Ghost was beside her, his shoulder being treated by a second medic. He reached out with his good hand and gripped her arm. 31, he said. Kestrel blinked at him, confused. I counted, Ghost explained. From the reports coming through before we landed. 31 confirmed kills in 18 hours. His grip tightened. You did not just survive out there, Kestrel. You decimated them. 31. The number felt abstract, disconnected from reality. 31 men who had families, who had names, who had woken up yesterday not knowing they were going to die. She had killed them all, one by one, because they stood between her and survival. She thought she should feel something. Horror, pride, remorse, satisfaction. Instead, she felt only tired. The helicopter banked toward FOB Sentinel, carrying them home through the darkness. Below, the jungle faded into black, swallowing the bodies and the blood and the evidence of what she had done. Kestrel closed her eyes and let the exhaustion take her. She had survived. That would have to be enough. Kestrel woke to the smell of antiseptic and the steady beep of medical monitors. White ceiling, fluorescent lights, the distant murmur of voices beyond a curtain. She was in a hospital bed, her torso wrapped in fresh bandages, and 4-line running into her arm. For a long moment, she simply lay there, letting consciousness return in slow waves. Her body felt distant, cushioned by whatever painkillers they had pumped in her system. The memories of the jungle seemed like fragments of a fever dream, too vivid and too violent to be real. Then she turned her head and saw Master Chief Castellanos sitting in the chair beside her bed. He looked like he had not slept in days. Dark circles under his eyes. Uniform wrinkled. Coffee cup clutched in hands that showed the faintest tremor of exhaustion. But when he saw that she was awake, something shifted in his expression. Relief, respect, and something else she could not quite identify. Chief Adeyemi. His voice was rough but warm. Welcome back to the land of the living. Kestrel tried to speak, found her throat dry and raw. Castellanos reached for a cup of water on the bedside table, held it while she drank. How long? She managed. 36 hours. Castellanos set the cup aside. You lost a lot of blood. The surgeons had to remove some shrapnel we did not know about. Apparently you took more than one hit out there. She remembered the counter-sniper's bullet, the graze across her ribs. She did not remember any shrapnel. But then there had been explosions. There had been a lot of things she had stopped noticing in those final hours. Ghost, she asked, recovering 2 rooms down. Castellanos allowed himself a small smile. He has been asking about you every hour. The nurses are ready to sedate him just to get some peace. Kestrel felt something loosen in her chest. Ghost was alive. Okafor was presumably alive too, or Castellanos would have mentioned it. The mission had succeeded. Against every odd, against every rational expectation, they had all made it home. The pilot, she said, Lieutenant Commander Okafor, is stable. Castellanos leaned back in his chair. Broken ankle, severe dehydration, multiple contusions. But he's going to be fine. He has been telling anyone who will listen about the woman who walked into an enemy camp alone and carried him out through the jungle. Kestrel closed her eyes. She did not want to be a story. She had never wanted to be a story. She just wanted to do her job, to serve with honor, to live up to the legacy her father had left behind. Castellanos seemed to understand her silence. He waited, patient and still, until she opened her eyes again. There is going to be an inquiry, he said. His tone was matter-of-fact, neither warning nor reassurance. Prescott is claiming you disobeyed orders, that your actions endangered the team, that the entire situation was caused by your failure to follow protocol. Kestrel felt a spark of anger pierce the fog of medication. She had been abandoned. She had been written off as expendable. She had survived 18 hours alone in enemy territory and rescued a prisoner that no one else even knew existed. And now Prescott was trying to blame her. Castellanos held up a hand before she could speak. That is what he is claiming. What actually happened is a different story. He reached into his jacket and produced a folder, laying it on the bed beside her. This is the after-action report compiled from radio intercepts, satellite imagery, and testimony from Senior Chief Mwangi and Lieutenant Commander Okafor. She looked at the folder, but did not touch it. 31 confirmed enemy kills, Castellanos continued, including a Russian military advisor who has been on our watch list for 6 years. Destruction of a forward operating base that was coordinating militia activity across 3 provinces. Rescue of a downed pilot who possessed sensitive intelligence about regional operations. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Chief Adeyemi, you did not endanger the team. You single-handedly accomplished more in 18 hours than most operators achieve in an entire deployment. Kestrel stared at him, uncertain how to respond. She had not been thinking about accomplishments out there. She had been thinking about survival, about the next shot, about putting one foot in front of the other until she could not move anymore. What happens to Prescott? She asked. Castellanos' expression hardened. Lieutenant Commander Prescott has been relieved of command pending formal court-martial proceedings. His decision to abandon a team member without proper justification, combined with his subsequent attempts to falsify reports and shift blame, constitutes serious violations of military law. He paused. His career is over. The only question now is whether he spends time in Leavenworth. Kestrel absorbed this without satisfaction. She had not wanted Prescott destroyed. She had just wanted to be seen, to be valued, to be treated as the professional she had spent her entire career becoming. There is something else, Castellanos said. He seemed almost uncomfortable now, shifting in his chair like a man about to deliver news he was not sure how to frame. Your classified service record is being reviewed at the highest levels. The restrictions that kept you listed as intelligence support rather than combat personnel are being reconsidered. Kestrel felt her breath catch. I cannot make any promises, Castellanos continued. But there are people in Washington who have seen what you did out there, and they're asking questions about why someone with your capabilities was being hidden behind a classification wall. He met her eyes directly. Things may be about to change, Chief, for you and for others like you. Others like her. Women who had served in the shadows, who had proven themselves 100 times over, who had been denied recognition because of policies written by men who had never seen them fight. She thought about her father again, about the pride in his eyes when she had outshot him for the first time, about his belief that she could become anything she wanted to become, that nothing could hold her back if she refused to be held. He had been right. It had just taken longer than either of them expected. Get some rest, Castellanos said, rising from his chair. You have earned it. When you are recovered, we will talk about what comes next. He paused at the curtain, looking back at her one final time. Your father will be proud, Chief Adeyemi. Damn proud. Then he was gone, and Kestrel was alone with the beeping monitors and the antiseptic smell and the slowly dawning realization that everything was about to be different. She closed her eyes and let herself drift, and for the first time in years, her dreams were not haunted by the ghosts of the past. They were filled with the possibilities of the future. 2 weeks later, Kestrel stood in a hallway outside a conference room at Naval Special Warfare Command, waiting for the inquiry board to call her name. Her dress uniform felt strange after so long in combat gear, the ribbons on her chest unfamiliar weight. She had earned every one of them in the shadows, and now they were finally being worn in the light. Ghost stood beside her, his arm in a sling, his presence a steady comfort. He had refused to let her face this alone, had insisted on attending despite medical advice to the contrary. Some debts, he had told her, could not be repaid with words. The door opened, and a young ensign gestured for her to enter. Chief Petty Officer Adeyemi, the board is ready for you. Kestrel straightened her uniform and walked through the door. The room was smaller than she had expected. A long table dominated the space, 5 officers seated behind it, their faces carefully neutral. At the center sat Admiral Patricia Vance, a woman whose reputation preceded her. 30 years of service. Combat vétéran, the highest-ranking female officer in naval special warfare. She studied Kestrel with eyes that missed nothing. Chief Adeyemi, Admiral Vance began. Please have a seat. Kestrel sat in the single chair facing the board, her hands folded in her lap, her expression calm. She had faced worse than bureaucratic scrutiny. She had faced men trying to kill her in the dark. This was just talking. We have reviewed the after-action reports, Admiral Vance continued. We have examined the testimony of Senior Chief Mwangi, Lieutenant Commander Okafor, and the surviving members of the team. We have analyzed satellite imagery and intercepted communications. She paused, her gaze intensifying. What we have not yet heard is your account. In your own words, Chief Adeyemi, tell us what happened in that jungle. Kestrel took a breath and began. She told them everything. The briefing at FOB Sentinel, Prescott's dismissiveness, the ambush at the compound, the helicopter lifting off without her. She described the first patrol she had engaged, the systematic elimination of enemy forces, the discovery of the Russian advisors. She told them about being wounded by the counter-sniper, about finding the camp where Okafor was held, about the decision to attempt a rescue she knew might fail. She did not embellish. She did not minimize. She simply told the truth, laid out in the same clinical precision she had used to place her shots. When she finished, the room was silent. The officers exchanged glances, their neutral expressions cracking slightly to reveal something that looked like amazement. Admiral Vance leaned forward. Chief Adeyemi, I have one question. When you realized you had been abandoned, when you understood that no rescue was coming, why did you not simply evade and survive? Why engage the enemy at all? Kestrel considered the question carefully before answering. Because evasion would not have stopped them, Admiral. They had established a forward operating base in that jungle. Russian advisors coordinating militia activity. A weapons pipeline supplying insurgents across 3 provinces. She met the Admiral's eyes directly. I was already behind their lines. I had the training and the capability to disrupt their operation. Hiding would have been safer for me, but it would not have served the mission. And the pilot? Admiral Vance pressed. You risked everything to rescue a man you had never met. With respect, Admiral, I did not risk everything. I made a tactical assessment that his rescue was achievable with acceptable risk. Kestrel paused, and even if it had not been, I could not leave him behind. I know what it feels like to be abandoned by people who should have protected you. I was not going to let someone else experience that if I had the power to prevent it. Admiral Vance studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. Chief Adeyemi, this board was convened to investigate potential misconduct and insubordination. Lieutenant Commander Prescott alleged that your actions endangered American personnel and violated operational protocols. She glanced at the other officers, who nodded in agreement. We find those allegations to be completely without merit. Kestrel felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. Furthermore, Admiral Vance continued, we find that your actions during this operation demonstrated exceptional courage, tactical brilliance, and unwavering commitment to your fellow service members. You accomplished what most would consider impossible, and you did it while wounded and alone. The Admiral stood, and the other officers rose with her. Kestrel rose as well, uncertain what was happening. It is my honor, Admiral Vance said, to inform you that you have been recommended for the Navy Cross. Additionally, your service record is being fully declassified, and you are being offered a position as lead instructor at the Naval Special Warfare Sniper School. She extended her hand. The shadows are over, Chief Adeyemi. It is time the world knew your name. Kestrel shook the Admiral's hand, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. The Navy Cross, the second highest combat decoration. Public recognition after years of classified silence. A position where she could train the next generation of snipers, could pass on everything her father had taught her. She thought about him now, about the way he had always believed in her, about the promise she had made at his grave to honor his legacy. Thank you, Admiral, she managed. I will do my best to deserve this. Admiral Vance's grip tightened briefly before releasing. You already have, Chief. You already have. When Kestrel emerged from the conference room, Ghost was waiting. He took one look at her face and broke into a rare grin. Good news, I take it. She nodded, still slightly dazed. Navy Cross. Instructor position. Full declassification. Ghost let out a low whistle. About damn time. He fell in a step beside her as they walked down the hallway. So what happens now? Kestrel considered the question. For years, she had operated in darkness, her achievements buried under classification stamps, her identity hidden behind cover stories. Now all of that was ending. She would have to learn how to exist in the light, how to be seen instead of invisible. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. Now, she said, I teach others what my father taught me. I make sure the next generation is better than we were. She looked at Ghost, the man who had believed in her when no one else would. And I make sure no one gets left behind again. Ghost nodded slowly. Sounds like a worthy mission. They walked out of the building together, into sunlight that felt like the beginning of something new. 3 months later, Kestrel stood at the edge of the shooting range at Naval Special Warfare Sniper School, watching her students prepare for their final qualification exercise. 24 candidates, the best marksmen the Navy had to offer, each of them hungry to prove themselves worthy of the sniper designation. Among them were 6 women, the first class to include female candidates since the combat restrictions had been lifted. The morning sun cast long shadows across the desert terrain, and a warm breeze carried the smell of sage and gunpowder. It was a good day for shooting. It was a good day for proving that excellence knew no gender. Senior Chief Adeyemi, one of her assistant instructors, approached, clipboard in hand. Candidates are ready for final brief. Kestrel nodded and walked toward the assembled class. They snapped to attention as she approached, their eyes fixed forward, their bodies rigid with nervous anticipation. She remembered that feeling. She had stood in their place once, terrified and determined, desperate to prove that she belonged. At ease, she said. The candidates relaxed slightly, though tension still hummed through the group like an electric current. Kestrel studied their faces, seeing echoes of herself in so many of them. The women who had been told they did not belong. The men from backgrounds that marked them as outsiders. The quiet ones who let their skills speak louder than their words. All of them had fought to reach this moment. All of them had earned a right to be here. Today you will demonstrate everything you have learned, she began. Precision, patience, the ability to remain calm when everything around you is chaos. These are not just skills. They are survival. They are the difference between completing your mission and coming home in a box. She paused, letting her words settle. Some of you will pass. Some of you will not. That is the nature of this work. Not everyone is meant to be a sniper, and there is no shame in discovering that truth about yourself. She met the eyes of each candidate in turn. But I want you to understand something. Passing this qualification does not make you elite. It makes you prepared. What makes you elite is what you do when the qualification is over. When you are alone in hostile territory. When no one is coming to save you. When the only thing standing between failure and success is your own will. The candidates were utterly still, hanging on every word. I know what that feels like, Kestrel continued. I have been alone in the jungle with enemies hunting me. I have been wounded, outnumbered, abandoned by people who should have had my back. And I survived because my instructors prepared me for that moment. Because they gave me the skills and the confidence to face the impossible. She straightened, her voice taking on a harder edge. That is what I intend to do for you. Not to make you comfortable, not to make you feel good about yourselves, but to prepare you for the worst day of your life, so that when it comes, you are ready. The candidates absorbed her words in silence. She could see the effect on their faces, the mixture of fear and determination that marked the beginning of true understanding. Kestrel glanced at her watch. You have 15 minutes before the exercise begins. Use them wisely. She turned and walked toward the observation tower, leaving them to their final preparations. Ghost was waiting for her at the base of the stairs, a cup of coffee in each hand. He offered one to her as she approached. Quite a speech, he observed. They need to understand what they are signing up for. Kestrel took the coffee, grateful for its warmth. I wish someone had told me the truth before I went through this. Would it have changed anything? She considered the question. No, but it might have made the hard parts easier to bear. They climbed the tower together, settling into the observation positions that gave them a clear view of the entire range. The candidates were spreading out now, moving to their assigned stations, preparing for the exercise that would determine their futures. Kestrel watched them through her binoculars, evaluating their movements, noting their habits. Some would pass. Others would not. But all of them would leave this place better than they had arrived. A familiar figure appeared at the edge of the range, walking with a slight limp that had become permanent. Lieutenant Commander James Okafor raised a hand in greeting, and Kestrel waved back. He had been assigned to the training command after his recovery. His flying days ended by the ankle that had never quite healed right. But he had found new purpose here, working with young pilots, sharing the lessons he had learned about survival and resilience. They had become friends over the past months. Not close, exactly, but connected by something deeper than ordinary friendship. They had survived the unsurvivable together. That created bonds that did not break easily. Ghost followed her gaze and smiled. He asks about you constantly, you know? Wants to make sure his guardian angel is doing okay. Kestrel shook her head. I'm not anyone's angel. Tell that to the 31 men who would disagree. Ghost's smile faded into something more serious. Tell that to the pilot whose life you saved. Tell that to me. She did not have a response to that. She had never learned how to accept gratitude gracefully. Action was easier than acknowledgement. Doing was simpler than receiving. The exercise began, and Kestrel turned her attention to her students. She watched them navigate the course, engage the targets, adapt to the challenges thrown at them by the instructors. Some excelled, others struggled. All of them fought. By the time the sun reached its peak, the exercise was over. 18 of the 24 candidates had passed. 6 had not, including 2 of the women. Kestrel felt the weight of those failures, even though she knew they were necessary. Not everyone was meant for this work. Better to learn that here than in the field. The successful candidates gathered for the final ceremony, their faces glowing with exhausted pride. Kestrel presented each of them with their qualification pins, speaking their names aloud, welcoming them into a brotherhood that had finally expanded to include sisters as well. When the last pin had been presented, when the new snipers had dispersed to celebrate their achievement, Kestrel remained on the range alone. She walked to the 1,000-meter line, the position where her father had first taught her to shoot at distances most people could not even see. She knelt in the dirt, pulled a small photograph from her pocket, and propped it against a rock. Her father smiled up at her from the image, young and strong, wearing the same uniform she wore now. I did it, Dad, she said softly. I came home. I honored your legacy, and now I am making sure others can do the same. The wind stirred the photograph, and for just a moment, she could almost hear his voice. Proud of you, baby girl. Always proud. Kestrel smiled, tucked the photograph back into her pocket, and rose to her feet. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Tomorrow there would be new candidates, new challenges, new opportunities to build warriors who would never leave anyone behind. But tonight, she would rest. She had earned that much. If this story moved you, drop a comment and tell us your favorite moment or character. And if you know someone who was ever underestimated and proved everyone wrong, share their story. We would love to hear it.